invite you guys to connect with me as well. So my first question to you is, the word grief is thrown around a lot. In your definition, what is grief? What does that mean to you? Anyone, just raise your hand and share. What does grief mean to you? Loss. Okay. Right, great. Yes. Pain, yes. A time of sadness, emotional pain and emptiness. Yes, yes. Distress, absolutely. And one more. Sorrow, yes. So these are all normal and words that usually do come up when individuals are thinking about what grief is. And it's interestingly enough that most of the words that we spoke of have to do with the emotional side of grief, right? The simplest definition of grief, and the one I like, is the one that defines it as a reaction, a response to a loss, right? So that's what we get to when I was speaking about the fact that it can be non-death related and death related. But what we often do when we think about grief is we do think about the emotional side, which is a big side, the distress, the sorrow, the emotional pain. But grief, if anyone has gone through it, and you live through long enough, you will. If anyone has gone through it, you know that it's so much more than just emotions, right? This is really something that impacts your whole body. It's physical, it's behavioral, it's spiritual in nature. I meet a lot of individuals who may not necessarily be able to express what is going on with themselves emotionally, but they will say, I feel a hole in my chest. I'm unable to eat. My sleep is impacted. I haven't had a good night's sleep in months because of this thing. I'm not able to focus, right? I can't, only Lord knows where I've left the keys for the millionth time. Oh, I left the stove. So it impacts any and everything. So, sometimes I remind people to move away from just the emotional, because there are so many other things going on. And I love the image that you see on the slide here. I hope that you can see it. It simply says how we want grief to be, right? And it's a straight line. That's how most of us want it to be, and that's how it's described often. It's a process that starts, that has an end, and you go through it. But unfortunately, it's more like that second picture. More like that spaghetti, that ball of yarn, everything going on in there. It is not a process that has a beginning, that has an end, that is clean cut, that is can be wrapped up with a bow like that. And I encourage you, if you're someone sitting here today, and you're thinking to yourself, wow, I feel validated. This is good to know. So and so died 5 years ago, 10 years ago. I still feel things around the anniversary. When I think about, I meet somebody with their name, when I think about the things that I'm doing that they haven't been able to see, it's normal. Grief does not go away. We learn to live with grief, but grief certainly does not disappear and have a clean cut end date. Mourning. Mourning is just the expression of how we grieve, right? In our Western society, there may be a certain expression. I certainly am wearing black today because that's for an expression. That's my mourning because of my grandmother's death. And I plan to do that for several weeks. And each culture and each society and each place, whether it's on a community level or whether it's on a larger level, Queen Elizabeth just died dead. That was a big expression of mourning that the country was undertaking and things that they were doing. So mourning is different from grief in that way, right? Mourning is not certainly about loss, but it's about the ways in which you express yourself after the loss. Just defining some terms for you. Now, I don't know if you all can see, oh, it's right here. So only one. You probably cannot see that as clearly as I can. But that is a picture that shows all the euphemisms, at least maybe in the US, in the English language, that people use. A euphemism is basically just a word. Instead of saying dead, died, dying, we use everything else but. So we don't need the picture necessarily. I'll open it back up to you all. What are other things that you have heard or you have used instead of the saying this person died? Yes. 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 Something. Yes. Yes. Good, thank you. Transition. Yes, that's a big one. I heard one here. Past. Yes. Kick the bucket. That's one of the ones in the picture. That's why we see that man kicking the bucket. Moved on. Yes. Yes. There's so departed. Yes, yes. These are all things I've heard before. In the English language, especially in the U.S., sometimes they say keep pushing up daisies, brought the deed to the graveyard, sunset, the sunset on their life. We use a lot of different things. Expired, yeah. That's one that we argue about in the hospital setting all the time. All the time, the professionals are like, we shouldn't use that, but that is still used in hospitals. Sleep, yes. I I have such, on sleeping. On a side note, a little later on, I talk about things that hurt and that help, but especially when talking to children, and I know us 7 Day Adventists, don't get us on the state of the dead doctrine, right? They're just sleeping, they're sleeping for a time, etc. Yes, we understand that. But especially with children, that can bring up so much fear when they associate sleep, the act of rejuvenating your mind and your body and doing it overnight, with death. So we have to be careful how we use that. Because a lot of the kids then develop a fear around going to sleep because they think now it means the same thing as death or dying as we adults understand it. Anything else? I didn't want to skip anyone. I saw your hand. No longer with us. Yeah, yeah. Gone home. Yes, yes. That's a big one. You hear a lot of people saying they're having homegoing services now instead of funerals and memorials, etc. So these are all things we use because we don't want to say dead, dying, death. And that has a lot to do again with our own fears, with our own things that we grow up with. But it's so important, especially at least clinically. You'll never hear me say any of those things. I work with children as young as 6 years old, and I gave you the reason. But also, I want to create the kind of community where we can be more comfortable to talk about these things, right? And sometimes there's something lost in translation when you're not clear clinically. Now, don't get me wrong. People say, "Wow, how are you in your practice? Does someone say passed away?" You say, "No, absolutely not. I'm mindful, but you won't hear me using some of those things myself because some of them can lead to confusion about what you're really trying to say." Now, anticipatory grief is something different. I wanted to spend a lot of time on that because sometimes in our communities, specifically here through the lens of our Christian church communities, sometimes we don't spend time speaking about anticipatory grief and speaking about something that we may notice right here in the midst of our community. We are waiting for someone to actually die to offer support, which is good. But many times people are dealing with an anticipation. Something is going on in their life where they are fearing or they are anticipating that a death is going to happen. And this is right along the lines of that ambiguity, right? Like, what does that mean? So ambiguous loss is a form of anticipatory loss, right? Thinking about an impending death. And there are two things that can happen. The person can be physically here. I'll give some examples in a bit. but their persona, their character, their mind is not as it should be. The person is physically here. They have not died yet. And then on the other end, the person is physically absent, yet their persona, what you know to be about them, is still intact. Here are some concrete examples. I wasn't just going to leave you all with the definitions, right? So you have a person physically absent, right? What just happened in Puerto Rico? Right? The hurricanes, it was hurricane season, etc. Even the earth is telling the fact that God is going to come back. But we will get in that, right? These things are constantly happening. These things going on in nature. Tsunamis, fires, etc. What happens if a flood comes in and you have no body? Right? These are real situations. What happens in the case of a disappearance? What happens in the case of someone who is right among us and a family member or friend is incarcerated? That individual is suffering grief. That person is not here physically with them. It is a loss, but their persona is very much intact. You can maybe speak to that person or not have access to them. What happens in the case of adoption? You know, a young adult or even an adult who finds out that they are adopted and thinking about their lineage, that's a loss right here in the midst of us. So those are some of the things that do need to be focused upon, but often we just skip right over them. We are ready and able to give support when the person actually dies. But there is that aspect of anticipatory grief and where people need a lot of support as well. Now, the person is physically present, but their mind, their persona may not be intact. One of the biggest ones I see all the time is Alzheimer's disease, where you may have an individual who's right here, they may come to church, they may not, etc. But that is still a loss, and often people call that a double loss, because there is the loss as that person does not recognize you, they cannot speak with you, physically they are deteriorating, and then later on comes the actual death. There is the loss that may be experienced in addiction. Right? If someone has a problem with marijuana, has an issue with alcohol, has an issue with sex or whatever it may be, that person in essence can very much be a slave to their addiction and is not operating as they would without the influence of those things. That's a loss. That's going on in our churches. What about chronic mental illness? Right? I'm not talking about the things where people say, oh, just take your medicine, take your, etc., go to therapy. But something where that individual is off and on, and this is really impacting their ability to function. How does that further impact their family and their friends? That's a loss. And oftentimes we don't, again, support these areas of anticipatory grief as ambiguous loss as we should within our communities. So here are some of the reasons why, right? Many individuals, for example, if it wasn't the case of Mother Nature, if it wasn't the case of a disappearance, being deserted, whatever, you may not be able to do your death ritual as you would want to. Sometimes the death is stigmatized, right? I cannot tell you the countless amount of people who are afraid within their church communities. And I'm being very specific here because we are in the church and this is through the lens of our community, right? But I cannot tell you how many people are afraid and still very much feel stigmatized to say, this person in my life died by suicide. Or this person in my life died because of an overdose, right? They say anything and everything, but it's you sometimes who's like, oh, this is not right. I know this little something, if you ever get anything out of them, if ever, right? So there's a stigma still very much related to certain ways in which individuals die. Soon we'll get to certain relationships. People don't want to bring up the loss because of the relationship that they're in. But there's still very much stigma around that. And people often in those circumstances, they expect you to carry on. They expect you, even though it's something in your mind, imagine they tell you that your child was at war, they are in the military, something happened, and you're not quite sure. Did they die? Did they not really die? Did they survive? Did they lose their memory? And all of that is going on within you, and people are, business as usual around you, right? So it can be very much a struggle for those within a family unit, within a friendship unit, within other community units to feel that they can express and talk about these kind of losses. Now, here are some factors influencing grief overall. And some of them can be stigmatized, some of them cannot. Your family values and beliefs, right? The role that the individual played in your life. Unfortunately, we even see it in the American system with the way in which they give bereavement days, right? If you say a close friend of yours died, oh, I'm sorry, that's not on the list. That's not mother, father. That's not mother, father-in-law. This person has been your friend for 40 years, But there is still this kind of hierarchy, right? There are people who are not even close to a parent as they are to a friend who is and becomes family, right? But there is no provision made for that. The age of the deceased. I can't tell you how many individuals take it upon themselves, and then we talk about later on the things that hurt, right? Oh, they live a nice full life. They were 100. Is that helpful to a grieving child, even though you're an adult? Is that helpful? Or oh my gosh, the worst of worst. I've had mothers who have had the death of children via stillbirth or miscarriage. Oh, you're still a childbearing age. You can have another. Are we helping or are we hurting? Hurting, right? So sometimes we think about, the age becomes important, especially in those instances, and impacts even the ways in which we react, right? Disenfranchised grief, I have a few slides on that and explain that in a little bit. But your family life cycle, right? That matters. If anyone has been in a family unit, especially sometimes in the Caribbean, yes, it does matter if you are abroad. Sometimes there's more pressure on you than if you were there, right? Paying for things, doing things. Sometimes also there is absence of knowledge, because maybe when you are someplace else, they're not telling you the day-to-day of what is going on. Right? Sometimes it's about your place in the family unit. I've had plenty of families say, hold on. I want to hear about what you're saying, but I can't take no decisions right now. I have to wait for my eldest brother to come. That's the rightful spokesperson of the family, right? Every culture is different in the ways in which they handle and talk about it and work through what may be going on with grief. And your attachment styles matter as well. Attachment style. Was it secure? Was whatever? Did you have a secure relationship with that person, or was it very fractured? A huge myth is that you only grieve those whom you love. Huge myth. And sometimes we in our efforts to be a balm for people, I should say, we say things like that. Like, oh, you're grieving so much because you love so much. What about the person who's over there, whose father never took care of them, who didn't have a great relationship, has a whole nother family, and that person died and is very much feeling lost? Are they not grieving just because that relationship was a mess? No. That's why we keep the definitions of grief very simple. Reaction to a loss. Because sometimes we have the tendency to add in all those other things, and then what happens is that others who do not fit into those categories feel very much like they can't come forward. No one here understands me. Am I weird for feeling this way? Some myths, and then I'll tell you the realities about grief. And by a show of hands, let me know if you've heard this, if you've been told this. Um, a show of hand, you've been told that grief is a predictable process. Or grief has a timetable. Has anyone ever told you something like, you know what, by 1 year, you should be feeling much better? Right? After a year, after you get to the first Christmas, after you get to those things, after you get to the first death anniversary, easy riding, right? And that's certainly not the case. I showed you the picture of how grief really is and how it impacts you. There are people, for many reasons, and I'll give you just one example, who don't even begin to fully feel the impact of their grief until months and months later. I've had clients whom, for example, their spouse has died. Younger spouse partners, their spouse has died. By the time they figure out how to pay the bills, by the time they do the funeral service, by the time they gather, by the time they pay for tombstone, pay the bills, get everybody out of their house after the 3 months who was staying with them, giving them help, and then quote unquote life is going back to normal, they say, Rashida, I just now feel like I've been able to kind of like really take stock of what has happened to me. Months down the line. Months and months. When we think about this pandemic that we have all just been through, there are some people who just now in 2022 are taking stock of what in the world just happened these last 2 years. That's how much life has changed. So it's certainly not a predictable process. It's certainly not one that's on a timetable. I would definitely remind you again and again, grief has no timetable. Any reaction could be 20 years down the line. You think about that child who died 20 years ago, and it brings up a pain in you, that's grief. And that's normal. That's normal. After a loss, we need closure. Man, we are human beings. We want closure. We want everything wrapped up. We want closure. But there isn't always that closure. That example I gave you of the father who, in that case, wasn't taking care of the child is very real. That child never had a conversation or is able to have a conversation and said, this is how I feel. This is what you did to me. And before the person dies and the person says, I'm sorry. That's often the movies where we get to feel absolved like that. Humanness is so much more messy than that. So we do not always get the closure in which we are seeking. Now, we are very blessed. We are very hopeful through the Christian lens because we know that we can go to God with all of those feelings and thoughts, and He can aid and help. But as far as sometimes looking for that closure between two individuals, death is not waiting for you, and death does not need you to get closure. Some of the work, a lot of the work often has to be done by yourself after that individual has died. Human beings are naturally resilient to loss. Have you guys heard that? Oh, it's a human condition. We know from the day we're born, we're working towards death. Again, some of the things we say to try to make ourselves feel better. If you ask me, I'm always of the mind that this was something that was never supposed to happen to us and for us. Okay? God's intent was never for us to die. So the pain, the shock at any age. I have had clients, and it really doesn't matter, when we think about that grief, that mid-7, I should say, where people say, well, if you knew the person was sick, it's easier to handle than if it was something more sudden, like a car accident or what. No, they both have different aspects and characteristics that make them different. There is a hope that you hold on to no matter what, even when you hear that someone is terminally ill. Logically, You say to yourself, okay, I'm aware that this is happening. The doctors are giving me tests. They're saying X, Y, Z, da, 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 da. But often there is still a shock when that individual dies, because sometimes you don't know how much you were holding on for a miracle, right? For a grand turnaround, for an intercession where that person would be okay, right? So it is still difficult and not always easy to deal with, even when you have been working through an illness, or they're accompanying someone, or been a caregiver. That's a whole nother workshop, on caregivers, and how your identity becomes so caught up in waking up, giving pills, going to doctor's appointment, doing this for the individual. That's a loss too. And we don't often think about that. We tell the individual, we're so sad, we're this, we're that, we're here to support you. But so many people are getting up each and every single day. And they're like, oh my gosh, it's like their bodies are getting up, right? I have so many people tell me that. I still get up at 12:30 because I think it's time to give the pill. Or I still find myself kind of taking the route to go here or to do this. So these are all things to be mindful of. Now, there are different grieving styles, right? If we are all different, we cannot all grieve the same way. The two major ones, and usually I say people are a mix, right? The two major ones are intuitive versus instrumental grief. What does that mean, Rashida? Well, I'm glad you asked. So, intuitive grief are for those who sometimes have a stronger connection or stronger ability to express themselves emotionally and verbally, right? Intuitive grief is often whom I see in the therapeutic setting. There are people who are seeking out therapy, or who want support groups, who want to talk about what is going on with them. That is of benefit to them. They don't have, well, it can still be difficult, but they are most likely to want to shine that light on what is going on inside. That's the intuitive griever. And you can take stock of, am I that? Do I like to talk about my feelings? Am I okay with crying and kind of expressing myself? Then there's the instrumental griever. This is the individual who, more through behavior, through action, through doing, thinking out some things. These are the individuals who often want to express themselves in those modes. So I'll give you maybe a cliche example, but it does happen a lot, right? I will have a family that has had the death of a child. And by the way, that's a myth, that couples get closer together after a death. You have to be very, very, very careful. There are a lot of couples who are so suffering because of the pain and the grief, and that they are experiencing it, and the different grieving styles, right? You have one member of the couple who wants to talk about it. Let's talk about our child. Let's keep the pictures up, right? I'm going to go get therapy. I'm going to, let's say in this case, because it often is, but not always, it is the woman, right? I can get together with my girlfriends. I feel supported in that way. I want to talk about this. Maybe the male, the husband in this couple says, I don't really want to talk about this. Can we take the pictures down? Instead of coming from work at 5:30, they're taking on extra shifts. They are working harder. No, we need this, etc. We're doing this, or they volunteer to paint or to do something in their community, or and it's like, why are you ignoring this? Why are you not talking about this? Both of those individuals are still grieving. They are just handling it in different ways. They have different grieving styles. So we do have to be very careful that the way in which I grieve, I don't put that higher up on my list and say this is the way everybody should grieve. And break relationships or feel betrayed, because this is what people say. I feel betrayed that this person isn't showing up the way I need them to. But sometimes it's about the ways in which they would show up in general under huge stress, under loss, thinking about grief. These are the normal ways that they would show up. And oftentimes it takes maybe a therapeutic setting to talk about it. Let me come forward and let me let you use the mic, because I don't think you're loud. You hear that, Mimi? You hear? No, I've been in rooms. You're not loud enough.
Yeah, I'm saying the instrumental griever, maybe the person who is obsessed and try to cover or you know, try to evade the grieving situation, and you try to find extra work to do, different periods in you know, extra shifts. Like he wants to, in one way, wipe out what's happening by getting involved in different activities, you know, different jobs and a different employments, so that he could just avoid facing the reality. But in fact, is that it's still there. And whether you take a 24/7 job or, you know, 360 job, the reality is that the grief is still there. And there are many people like that. They take extra shifts and take a long journey, go on a long vacation to avoid the reality of what's happening. Is that what it's all about, instrumental?
Thank you for sharing that. I would move away from it just being like that. Um, there are individuals who may be trying to avoid, but there are individuals who this is not about avoidance for them. This is about the ways in which they feel more grounded. It actually keeps them stable, right? So I'll use another example that could maybe clarify. You know, thinking about when people go back to work, right? I've had the gamut. Well, let's say it's a utopia. Let's say you don't have to go back to work. Because we know we live in a very real world where, you know, someone could die Monday, and because of finances, you got to go back Tuesday. That's just the reality of this country that we're in. But let's say you didn't have to go back to work. There are plenty of people who still very much make the choice to go back to work. Not because they are trying to avoid what's going on, but because it provides them 8 hours of the day where they are doing something that is familiar to them, where it gets them out of the house. Some people are very aware if they stay there in that bed and do not get up, that they may stay there forever. So they use that as opportunity. Okay, well, it forces me to shower. It forces me to brush my teeth. I'm going, you know, I'm doing this. I'm getting home. It's not in an avoidant way, but it's actually in a way to sort of balance out and to work through the major stress that is upon them holistically, like we spoke about grief being, right? Then there are people who, you know, may say, hey, I need 2 weeks, I need a month. I know plenty of individuals who have the U.S., let me not get into that. The U.S. is very difficult, but who have taken FMLA just because of their health. And they do need that extra time. And work is not providing anything for them. If anything, they're just like, it's stressful. I don't need to be there. People don't understand. And I just need to be doing something else as I work through what is going on with me. So it's not necessarily about being bad or good. I want to, you know, move away from sort of those terms, but it just is. It's about your style of grieving and the fact that we all do it in different ways. And be mindful, most of us are not the one or the other. We are a mix in a lot of different ways, right? I know, for example, I'll use myself. I can be very instrumental when the death first happens. Like, what are we doing? What's the funeral service? Who's saying the special words? Who's making the program? Like, that helps me feel like I'm contributing in that way. And you need those people in families and in churches and in workplaces to move things along. Does that mean that I'm grieving any less? Absolutely not. But this is just the way I am handling and working through it now. Okay? So those were grieving styles. Disenfranchised grief. I said we would get to that. Big word, but keep these things in mind. Disenfranchised grief was a term that was coined by Kenneth Doka, Dr. Kenneth Doka, and basically he says that disenfranchisement happens when someone dies, and it's one of three things. The relationship is not recognized. We'll get to some examples. The loss itself isn't acknowledged, or the griever is excluded. And I have examples to explain those things, or further explain those things. So the relationship is not recognized. I gave you the example of the friend, right? Nobody's giving grieving days when a friend dies. Nobody's giving grieving days when a neighbor dies. These are all people we often come into contact with who may impact our lives in many different ways. Foster parents. No one is offering grief groups out there. Well, what happens when you were close to adoption or fostering a child and then they get adopted and they're no longer in your life? These are all things that happen and occur. When in-laws die, some in-laws, God bless them, they literally are your second parents, right? And you are so in relationship with them and so in tune with them. That's not always recognized. Step parents, the same way. Now, listen, don't go saying that Rashida told you, she accepts homosexuality or extramarital affairs and blah, blah. That's not the point. But the point is that it would be foolish of us to think that these things are not happening in the church. Okay? So it's stigmatized, it's taboo, but that person who was so-and-so's mistress for 20 years is still grieving if so-and-so dies. That's just the truth of it. No matter how you feel morally about that, they are still grieving. So it's important to keep that in mind, And then we spoke about those words that help, those words that hurt, right? How helpful is it to say, well, you knew you knew he was with, family and blah, blah, all of these things. How helpful is that? When the person is really holistically being impacted by this situation, by this death. More acceptable now because of the society that we're in, but also same-sex couples for years have spoken about the disenfranchisement in which they feel and not being recognized, and nobody, you should not have been involved in that, no matter how we feel. Again, morally, if that person died, that is grief. Colleagues is another one less spoken about, You've been sitting next to this person for 25 years. You expected to retire together. They're your favorite colleague. They come to your house. They do this and that. Sometimes you feel or weird or do not even mention at all that someone like that died. Yes, yes. I'm glad to thank you for that comment. The comment was about the disenfranchisement of siblings. I'm glad to say that there are many more support groups and things to help, at least as far as I know in the New York City area, and I'm glad to help anyone find those. But that's one of the biggest things that my siblings do say, right? You have the death of your sibling, and they will say, literally, people will tell them, how's your mom and dad? Or people will say, how is the wife of your brother? Are they doing okay? Or people will come to them and say, how are your nieces and nephews? And they're sitting there and they're thinking, my goodness, no one is going to ask me how I'm doing? And that is definitely disenfranchisement, and often grown up, especially with adult siblings, because when you're younger, you're in the same home, and you're relating in that way. People often do ask about that, but when you're older, it's like, we're so sorry for your loss, and they keep it moving. And siblings, especially, do still need the support. Now, the loss is not acknowledged. We're talking about this. Oh, I'll continue, but I think something happened to the slides. Definitely something happened to the slides. So the loss is not acknowledged, right? I have it right here. That's why you have your backup. Such as adoptions. We spoke about that. Animals. Now, we all have to be mindful of our biases. And I always am telling my co-workers, I said, listen, I'll do everything human. And they know what that means. I personally am not going to run an animal group because you lost your dog. Me personally. But there are plenty of people who that animal truly is like family. And we also, what I figured out in this work, and I've discovered, is we also don't know the reason why people are so impacted. I had a woman whom her husband was ill, and she got that dog not because she wanted to, but because she said, this is something to cheer him. This is something we're bringing into the home. This is something that will also get me out, etc. Her husband died, and you would not believe how protective she is of that dog. I often, on the other end, said, Lord, please let nothing happen to that dog. Because it is then the support, the reminder, right, of why you got that animal in the first place. So sometimes it's not always as the eyes can see, right? So that may not be as recognized. Again, don't say Rashida was out here saying she was all for abortion. No. But we would be foolish to think it doesn't happen in our churches. So are we giving support, or are we pretending that abortions do not happen? Whether you are medically making the choice or forced to make the choice, or whether for other reasons you are making the choice. All still under the lines of grief, right? The griever is excluded. Young children especially. I told you guys I work with children as young as 6, and I always have a special place in my heart for them. And I always often talk with families, all kinds of families, about how to include them. You would not believe, especially with my teenagers, how many children are so mad and upset and still harboring the fact that they got no say whatsoever in that funeral service. No one asked them if they wanted to say a word. No one asked them if they wanted to read a poem. No one asked them what flower color they wanted to pick. Some kids, no one even spoke to them. Grandma was here one day, and grandma was not here the next, and so it goes. So it's so important not to exclude our children in what is a part of life, right? And kind of using those teaching experiences or those learning experiences to talk to them about death and dying. I was so glad my little buddy was here. But, to not exclude them from things like this. The elderly, we also do the same in a lot of ways, right? Especially the adult children, where you swoop in, we're making the decisions now, we're doing this. Or because financially you may be the one providing, you're then not seeing that elder in the same way. Be mindful not to exclude in that way. Persons with mental health difficulties. What could so-and-so contribute? They can, they'll mess the whole thing up. And we get caught in thinking about the appearance of things, instead of being as inclusive as we should be. clinicians or those in the health professions? What happens when, your clients died? What happens when you are a nanny and a child in that family dies? These are things that we're not often speaking about, all under that umbrella of disenfranchisement. And of course, the pandemic was, poster child, 2020, 2021, for a lot of disenfranchisement that is happening and occurring just within our society. Some death related, some not death related. So, non death related, when it comes to the pandemic, loss of employment and income. Just think to yourself, was this me? Was it someone I know? Most of us can answer affirmatively. Loss of educational opportunities, the loss of freedom and social movement. I had so many clients that it was another layer of feeling down and low because they couldn't do the things that usually would help them. So you would say, go walk in the park, go take a walk out in nature, go for coffee with your friends, or, I would go see a movie with a friend, I'm going to do this. The pandemic shut that down. So now you have a death and you're not able to cope in the ways that are most helpful to you. The loss of those gatherings, church being one of them, worshiping, graduations, proms, the loss of routine and that connection with coworkers, connection with community, connection with church, connection on and on with friends. When everybody's trying to sort of fend for themselves and grapple with what's going on, a lot of things can be lost. And then death related. A lot of individuals, very much, and I'm seeing this more and more, still feel survivor's guilt because these are the two common ones I'm finding. Firstly, they had COVID and did not die. So what makes me the one who is here when this person died, right? And I usually see that when individuals have avoided an act of nature or have lived through an accident. It is wild that this is happening with COVID. Continually, people are talking about that. I had it too. I was in that house with that person. We all had it. Why is it that they're the one who died? What is my purpose? Why am I still here? And that becomes an aspect of their guilt. I also am seeing it with sort of, I guess, the end of the story. A lot of individuals have felt guilt because I told that individual to go to the hospital. I didn't know that they would be alone in there. I didn't know that they would die. I didn't know what was going on. Or I told that individual to stay home. We would handle it ourselves. We would do this. I should have told them to go on. So a lot of guilt is resonating out there, right? Thinking your actions in some way cause the death. Feeling cheated about the ability to mourn, right? So many people, and it's not because they didn't have the financial means or the means to do it. They said, my stuff has been here. My money has been here waiting to bury my mother, waiting to bury my father. And to find out that they're in a truck somewhere on the street and we can't do this and we just have to bury you and we can only have 2 people, 4 people coming to a wake when they knew 500 that would show up for them. That's traumatic. And people are still reeling from that, right? Loved ones not being able to connect in the ways in which we would like to connect, right? That lack of physical contact as well. Just this week, I was talking with someone whose husband died and who used to always love to go to dance class. And just this week, it became a thing for her. The instructor held her, and she was like, whoa! For many reasons, right? And she's like, wow, I'm just now beginning to see what we've been missing in the pandemic with people being able to touch, hug, hold hands, be close to one another. And of course, that is, in a huge way, making her miss the intimacy she had with her husband. So all of these things and more are showing up just out of the 2 plus years that we have been in with this pandemic. So finally, because my intent was to just be 1 hour and then take your questions. So words that help versus words that hurt. Let me take away this slide. Hold up. Why am I giving you guys answers? We're going to do a little bit of participation, right? Because, like I said in the beginning, there are things, and grief is one of the most, I don't have to tell you guys, one of the most vulnerable moments in an individual's life. And I have no shortage of clients, and maybe even myself, of people that remember what you said to hurt them when they were grieving. No shortage of people that have cut off friendships because individuals did not show up for them in the way that they expected while they were grieving. In the same vein, you know, people are sometimes so pleasantly surprised. So-and-so did this for me, so-and-so showed up, I did not expect that, they are a great resource. We have those as well. So here's my question. Now, don't use this as an opportunity to air people out. That's not what we're doing. But let's start with hurt first. Has anything been said to you when you think about your grief journey that hurts, that still resonate with you today? Anybody want to share what one of those things may be? Something that hurts. Can you project a little, or I'll bring the mic to you? Whichever. Okay, she's like, don't bring the mic. Okay.
I said my mother, I think at the time she was 87,
Yes.
87 going 88 that
Yeah.
year. And she said, didn't you expect her to die? That blew my mind.
Yes.
And even hearing it again, saying it over. But I still remind her, I don't know why I do it, but I remind her of what she said.
Right.
And that was painful.
Yes. And I used that example before, right? Not even knowing that someone in the room had experienced that. But this is true stuff that happens to individuals, especially when you get to a certain age. Oh, you didn't expect that? Oh, they live a nice full life. Those things are hurtful. Thank you for sharing that, sister. Anybody else? Something that hurt. Right here in the blue, and then I'll take you afterwards, and then that's it for her. Right there in the blue. Raise your hand again, sister. Right there, yes.
Yeah, hello. My mom is a little package I'm going to give, not long. My mom has 4 of us. Well, she had 4 of us. My mom is no longer here. She died in 2020. My dad died in 2019. My mom had 3 boys and 1 girl. My 3 brothers died. My father died, and my mom died. Just me left. She had no more sibling, nothing. And my first brother died at 18 years old. One died at 26. One died at 58. And the one that died he's 41 years now, he died, Kirkland, at 1981. And there are times I still cry for him. Still cry. Because sometimes little things I see her do, I remember him.
Yeah.
So my mom and I was very close. She was the last person at my hand, during it. All my brothers and my father died. And one of my church family told me, why I behave like my mother is my God and my son. No, my son is left, and he's not with me in this country. But there's not a day go by, I don't think of him. I got scared, like, suppose I get a call, he's dead too. Because I was asking God, Lord, you took everything from me, my father, my mother, and all my siblings, just me left. What do I do? Then I have my son. And sometimes I will call, and I will ask him, are you okay? Sometimes he will just send me text, Mommy, I'm okay. I know you're going to ask me if I'm okay. I'm all right, because I'm still grieving. Yes. And one of my church family tell me, why do it seem as if I'm making my mother, my son, my God? And I'm making him my God, but it's who I had, my love, So, and it still hurts me.
Yes. Thank you so much for being transparent and sharing that. And I don't shy away from those moments, nor do I want to move away from them too quickly, because I want all of us to feel that discomfort and to remember what that feels like. Because sometimes it's because we can't empathize and we cannot put ourselves in that position, or we're so quick to move on from the pain that we speak before we think, you know. So let's take that moment to let those words resonate and to just imagine, because we were not in your position, to just imagine what that would feel like to hear that, you know, while grieving.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that.
What was the question?
Words that hurt. What's a word that was said to you, phrase, sentence that was said to you while you were grieving that hurt?
Okay. So, my brother died, I think, in 2016. Yeah, I think around that time, 2016. And when I went to Jamaica, it was a sad time for me, and I went to the funeral, and one of the time they asked me, I'm trying to make it short. One of the time they asked me to go up and just say something what you remember about what I remember about my brother. And when I went up, I just couldn't talk. As I opened my mouth, I was crying. And I said, you know, I was just crying. So, even though that year passed and I came up, now it's in like 2022, and I still miss my brother, because I remember that we grew up together, and I remember that he was sick. I remember that he was a smart boy, smart young boy. He loved God. He read his Bible. He was a Christian. He go to church, go to bright in at church, bright at school. He just loved God. When I come home, sometimes he's in the living room reading his Bible. And when he got sick, it was so sad. It was a sad moment for me, and I tried to just I don't show my burdens on anybody. I go to school still, but in my heart, I know that something is not going on right, and home is not like how it used to be. And since he died, I'm still grieving. And sometimes I sit on the side of my bed and said, I miss my brother. If my brother was here, sometimes he could have read the Bible, me and him couldn't go to church and things like that. But since he's not here now, it's me alone, or my other sibling, my other sister. So one night I went to my mother and I said to my mother, you know, let me start talking, just want to talk how I feel. She said, she dead and gone already. She dead and gone already. So why you still just thank God saying dead and gone already? So I said, why you say that? He's still my brother. He was here. So sometimes people say things to us like we can just get over a situation like that. Right. Somebody that is close to us, somebody that impacts our life positively. Even some negative things, but they're still our family.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. Absolutely painful. Now, things that are helpful, that were helpful to you in your grief. What is something that, or some way in which someone showed up that was helpful? We have one more negative thing.
So recently I lost my mom and my brother a couple of months ago. And this day I was feeling real low. And I needed someone to talk to. So I called a sibling. And I said to him, I want my mom back. And he shouted at me. He shouted at me and said, you just crying down the place and messing up everybody. You need to stop. And after that happened, I just feel, you know what? I'm going to just keep my grieving to myself and do not talk to nobody about it.
I'm so glad that you shared that. Thank you. You know, and it so resonates with what we said, right? Sometimes I think that people, when you spoke, sometimes people would say, "Oh, phew, that was just a colleague. They don't know anything about you." Da 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 da. But it's so much harder to make those excuses when it's supposed to be a sibling, a mother, etc. Often the hurt is bigger or feels like it cuts more like a knife because it is those who are close to us who are saying the hurtful things. What about those things which were helpful? Save that for our question portion. I'll come back. Right, right. So that was helpful. Thank you. Right. Thank you. Things that helped.
Like keep your mouth shut and give a hug. Keep your mouth shut and give a hug. And that helps.
You want to come to work with me Monday? Actually, I took Monday off. But yeah, Tuesday. Yes, yes, yes. Absolutely. I'm a big believer in that. Um, let's go straight to that, right? Instead of saying something that is hurtful, if you're not sure, just zip it. You don't got to say anything. You really don't. Presence so matters. I think about Job's friends sitting up in there. Just sit, be quiet. Job, what happened? Did you bring this onto you? Just presence says something as well. Our last one with things that help.
I think it was for me and my family, it was for the folks that showed up, that simply showed up and spent time in the house. In Jamaica, it's a whole different thing. People come to your house and camp out there like for 2 weeks. But just the people that showed up was helpful.
Thank you, thank you. So you guys don't really need this live. This is why, why give you the cheat code when life shows you these things? So helpful things, oh, look at this. I switched them around. That should be switched. Hurtful things is what I'm reading from. It's entitled differently. So I know just how you feel is not helpful. And I love teenagers for that because they'll tell you, no, you don't. Did you lose this mother? Did this sister die? You didn't have the same relationship. No, you do not know how I feel. It's much better to say something, like if you want to go along that route, you can say, I don't know how you feel. And then if you feel that you're going to say something that is, that can add positivity to the situation, you can say, in my case, when my mom died, this is what I did to help me. And you're very clear that this was what helped me, right? Don't cry. That's not helpful. People should be able to express themselves in the ways in which they need to in the moment that honors their grief, right? Especially what we're telling our young men about not crying and how that's related to weakness. Then we wonder why we are growing up with a generation that's so destigmatized to emotion that should be moved and are not. Don't cry. Don't feel. You should feel. Anything that starts with you should feel, sad, proud, but keep it to yourself. People should not feel anything that you think they should. Much better to say, how are you feeling? How are you doing today? I never start sentences with you should. Don't think about it is another thing. If only you had, that's not your case. It doesn't matter. That person is dead. That person has died. It's over. It doesn't matter what you thought should have happened, if you thought they went to the wrong hospital, if you thought you had done this, if you had tried this and that. I cannot tell you how many people tell me from COVID, somebody was said, oh, you should have tried this remedy. If only you had, it doesn't matter. And it's not helpful. And the one that is really killing us sometimes, be strong. Woo! That is like killing generations. This whole be strong. I often tell my clients we need to reevaluate what strength means. It's actually more strong to stand and to talk and to feel and to discuss and to do than to push down and push down. Oh, that's another big one. I just silently roll my eyes. I know our Adventist people, Don't cry as if you have no hope. You know what? We all read it, okay? I can cry, I can feel deeply. And very likely that person has not felt what you have felt, so they cannot tell you how to cry. Words that do help, when you're engaging people in conversation. What was your father like? Tell me a little bit about them. Share something with me, right? What was something you like to do with your siblings? Share that with me. Let's talk about that. Engage the person if they want to speak, to be able to share that with you. I care about how you are feeling, and giving room for that. Would you like to talk about it? Because too many of us assume that when we're ready is when that other person is ready. Right? Would you? If they don't, I'm here when you are. I'm thinking about you today because I know it's so-and-so's birthday. I know it's so-and-so's anniversary. And that's something that I think we all can do, and I do recommend. I even try to do it myself. When someone talks about a special day that's coming up or whatever, even though I know my memory has gone to pieces now, I can't, but I quickly try to write it down, jot it down in the calendar. Because you don't know how moving that text is, that call is when you say, I recognize that today is so-and-so's birthday. It may be a difficult day for you. I'm here for you. Okay? All righty. Sister Harry, this is how we enfranchise people. We validate them. There's power in saying that we're all grieving, that we have grief, that, in the ways that we are feeling. Grief education, thank you, is what we have done here. We've sat, we've spoken about, we've processed some things. Virtual support or in person back now, I wouldn't be a believer or, wouldn't be here if I didn't believe in therapy. So reaching out and seeking out outside support if you need it, and remembering that disenfranchised grief is still grief. And all of those individuals do need support. Sister Harry, I think I have like 2 minutes now for questions. So I think that gives me time for maybe 2 people.
I'm one of the presenters here this afternoon. I just want to, she may not say this, but this fall, and I'm sure you're going to say this because I run a grief group too, is what I call the corridor. The holiday season is the hardest season for people to get through, coupled with the fact of what we call seasonal affective disorder. So when the clock goes back, it gets darker. Most of them are used to warm. Please do something about it. It's okay to talk to somebody. And I'm sure like yourself and I, we kind of crusaders to go to each church to make sure that you talk about this, because the holiday season between Thanksgiving and New Year's Eve is very hard. So if your aunt or somebody that passed away in March, for some reason, I don't have it statistically, but this is tough. So we need to support each other among all the Christmas programs and all of that. This is the time where we can really encourage each other. And this is the best time to encourage each other.
Thank you for saying that. Absolutely. And, you know, it's because we're more Christian, we think this is when it starts. For our Jewish brothers and sisters, Rosh Hashanah was hard, Yom Kippur for hard. For our Indian brothers and sisters, Diwali is hard. Like, all of these things are happening right now. So it's particularly hard because of all the rituals and the family gatherings and the things that we often did together. But also, it's all the more hard because television and Party City and 106.7 with their holiday music will just not let up. So in effect, you know, trying to make that money, it's always so present that, wow, I'm missing this, I'm ending off the year without this person, I'm starting a new year without this person. So I absolutely agree. Now is more than ever we can be supportive. These are my last two comments. Okay? Question?
My question is this. So I lost my sister 3 weeks ago, but she was on hospice for some time. So I've been going back and forth, helping with her and stuff like that. But even though she did not pass as yet, my grieving process had started way before her death, because the times that I went to Canada to visit her, I see how she was declining, and I knew eventually that it was going to happen. How do you help someone deal with that you started grieving even before she literally had passed?
Thank you. I'm not sure if you were here when we were talking about the anticipatory grief. That's just a little bit of it. I didn't go in depth, but certainly you can begin that anticipation of that person dying just because of what you're seeing, right? You're seeing differences maybe in them physically and what's going on mentally. You're thinking about their death. It may be impending. You know, I definitely do recommend speaking to someone therapeutically, even while you may be going through anticipatory grief. I would say that especially with most hospices, they do assign social workers to each patient. And those social workers are not just there for the patient, but they're there to provide support for the family as well. So that's already an in right there. She lived in Canada. You can still receive support from them. But, and you said she did die a few weeks ago. 3 weeks ago, my condolences. But you can now to receive bereavement support. And there are many that will do it in this area. Cope Foundation being one of them that has sibling groups. Okay, my last question. I don't say it, and my clients hate it. What I do is I mirror. There is plenty of room, and if you listen long enough, this is our big issue. We all sometimes, when people are grieving, think we're going to swoop in and we're going to say the just right thing in our visit, and then we're going to leave that person feeling better. Oftentimes, when you sit, you're quiet, you're present, the griever tells you what they're thinking in their minds, what their train of thinking is. So I would wait if that person, during my visit or during our conversation, says, you know what? The only good thing is that they're not suffering anymore. Then I would say, right. I would even go and say, oh, you're absolute. I would say, right, yeah, they're not. That's it. That's all you have to say. But I would never be the one to engage that. I don't know what they're thinking, right? Another popular one is God wanted it. How dare you? Christian or not, I don't introduce that. Now, if somebody to me says, you know what, God has a reason for it all, I say, he's all powerful, you know. That's it. But I would never be the one to introduce that into the space. I don't know where the person is. I don't know what they're thinking. That's not my call, and I'm definitely not God. Okay, everyone, I thank you so much for being here this afternoon as we talked about a difficult subject. I hope that you received, and Sister Harry has my contact number in case anybody needs any extra support or wants to know where they can begin to get some support about grief. Thank you.
Come on, put your hands together again for Rashi. I told you she was, and you know, after I introduced her, I had to run downstairs, and when I came back, man, you are strong. You buried your grandmother today? Wow. I mean, just says a lot, doesn't it? She's able to come from burying her grandmother to come to talk to us. She's in Haiti. Yeah, it doesn't matter where. The fact that she's able to come and talk to us on a subject like this, she didn't back out and say, Sister Harry, I'm sorry, you know, today I can't do it. It shows a lot of strength. We thank you so much from the bottom of our hearts. Stand up, girl. And on behalf of the Family Life Department, we just want to say thank you. Thank you so much. And I think it's also an anniversary, so we're sending off to her husband. That's why she's leaving. That's why she had to start early, because it's her anniversary, and she has to. Rashid, thank you so much. And I'll definitely contact you, without a doubt. Without a doubt. Thank you so much. Now, we have 2 more presentations to go. One's going to be right here. One's going to be there. That's our pastors. That's our Pastor Francis, and this is our Assistant Pastor Morgan. We have 2 more presentations. One over here with Brother Gary Graham. He's going to be doing anxiety, depression, right? Anxiety and depression. And over here, we're going to have Sister Amelia Flynn Hamilton, very good friend of Rashi. You see them hugging in the back. And she's going to be doing family, marriage. Am I missing anything, Amelia? No? Family and marriage? Over here. Okay? Sister John said that's not for her. So you want to go into... no, both presenters,